think it would be a great idea for us to hear a little bit from the founder, one of the founding members of the Franco-American Centre, and that is Ovide Lamontagne.
Well, good evening, and thank you for welcoming me and inviting me to share some reflections about the founding of the Franco-American Centre on this 30th anniversary of the establishment of the Franco-American Centre, Centre de Franco-American. My name is Ovide Lamontagne, and I'm the founding president of the Franco-American Centre. And I'd like to tell a little story about how the Franco-American Centre was founded. And I would say it's a merger between vision and necessity. And the reason I say that is because of one person. His name is Eugène Lemieux. Jean Lemieux was the president of the Association Canado-Américaine back in the late 80s and into the 90s. And Jean Lemieux was quite a man. He was very visionary and creative in a lot of ways. I don't know how I first met Jean, but I think it was through my father, who was chairman of the board of St. Mary's Bank, and Jean also served as a director of the board of directors at St. Mary's. In any event, I recall walking out of my law firm at Divine Millimet in 1989 or early 1990 as a 32-year-old young lawyer. And as I'm walking out on Chestnut Street from the firm, I see Jean Lemieux walking down the street going to lunch with someone else from the ACA. And Jean called out to me. He said, "Ovid, do you have a minute?" And I said, "Sure." So I crossed the street. And Jean said, "I have an idea about something to do with the ACA. Can you come to my office and visit with me?" And I said, "Sure, I can." So the next few days, we scheduled a meeting. I went to see Jean in his office on 52 Concord Street, which was the ACA building. It had been the ACA building for many years. In fact, the ACA was one of the only domestic fraternal benefit insurance society based in New Hampshire under the jurisdiction and regulation of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. And the ACA was having some financial challenges, Jean shared with me. He said that the building had been in the ACA asset base for so long that it was fully depreciated. And the ACA needed more reserves in order to sell more insurance. So he said he had this idea. And the idea was to sell the ACA building to a not-for-profit organization and then lease it back for a period of 15 years, a minimum of 15 years, in such a way that the rental payments would be fair market value, would be able to cover the debt service of the loan used by the not-for-profit organization to continue to service that loan and then to have some money to operate. And he said he wanted a not-for-profit organization that would promote the Franco-American culture, that would also preserve some of the historical artifacts at the ACA. The ACA had in its possession a number of fine artworks from a number of artists, some really rare books, and a lot of other items. And that was his vision. And it was motivated by necessity. Necessity was to generate some cash to help the operations of the ACA, and particularly to build up its cash reserves. So I set out to work with Jean and a number of people to form a not-for-profit organization called the Franco-American Centre, which was filed on November 20th of 1990. And what I'd like to do is share the screen here, if you give me a minute, to show you what the Articles of Agreement looked like when this was formed. And the ACA was a brand new corporation, had no prior iteration, if you will. And give me a second here. I'm going to continue to do this to try to minimize my screen and get to here. And I'm hoping you can see these Articles of Agreement. Again, filed on November 20th, 1990, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner. And what's important about this document isn't what it's said in here. I think it's who signed it. And it was important for the ACA to find people who were not ACA people in order to preserve the 501c3 status of our creatable 501c3 status with the Franco-American Centre, as well as to preserve the sort of arm's length relationship between the ACA and this new entity, so the insurance department would recognize the transaction as truly an arm's length transaction creating reserves for the ACA. And you'll see two names. The first two names are names you'll never find in any other document, I suspect. That was my name and my father's name. And then you'll see Silvio Dupuy. Maurice Bellevaux was a wonderful support. By the way, Silvio is a former Manchester mayor, many of you know, and really a prominent Franco-American leader in New Hampshire. Maurice Bellevaux, an artist and a businessman in his own right, spent a lot of time in the early days with the Franco-American Centre. Buddy Faneuf of Faneuf Funeral Homes was a signatory. Paul Pade, I'll talk about Paul in a minute, who was with the ACA. Robert LeBlanc, some of you may know, he was a professor at UNH, wonderful man, gentle soul, and he perished in the 9/11 attacks. He was on one of the flights to Los Angeles. Maurice Bois was the Supreme Court judge, I think who had retired by then, or was near retiring. Dick Charpentier, well-known accountant in the area. Bill Jollick, whose family had been very involved in business and charitable works in New Hampshire and in Manchester specifically. Rosalie Willette, someone who was affiliated with the ACA for the years, and also Bob Baudouin, who was a physician, an anesthesiologist. And that was basically the incorporators for the ACA, a really interesting and eclectic group of citizens who Jean Lemieux and I were able to recruit to start the ACA. And I'm going to try now to move back to video. And give me another minute, I'll do that, hopefully effortlessly. So the ACA was formed, and on December 20th, 1990, the transaction, which was the sale of the real estate, the 52 Concord Street property, which had served as the home of the ACA for so many generations, was transferred. In other words, a closing occurred, title was transferred to the Franco-American Centre. And then the Franco-American Centre Board was established and created around that time as well, with the founding of the corporation. And we started meeting. And I remember distinctly that Jean Lemieux had the sense that the Franco-American Centre was going to be some sort of a holding organization, not do a lot. Although he wanted it to do much, but I don't think he knew what he had created, because we started taking a lot of initiative on our own. Aurora Eaton was, I think, our first executive director. She had great vision too for what we can do to try to preserve and promote the French Canadian and Franco-American culture. And this is where Paul Pade comes in. Paul was working at the ACA, very much strongly involved with the promotion of the French language and culture as part of the ACA's mission. The ACA, by the way, as a fraternal benefit insurance society, was tax exempt and had a charitable purpose, which was, again, really the Franco-American history. Paul made it very clear at the beginning, from the very beginning, that this Franco-American Centre was not limited to French-Canadian heritage. He wanted the Franco-American Centre to be an umbrella organization for all Francophiles in the area. People who knew, and he was really quite clairvoyant, because this was prior to the immigration to Manchester of a lot of peoples from around the world and French-speaking countries that we have seen since the late 90s into the present day. And so the Franco-American Centre really adopted that vision that this was about not just French-Canadian history, even though we were probably the driving force about it, but we wanted to welcome all Francophiles, people from France who had immigrated to the United States, again, people from other French-speaking countries, and Anglophones who wanted to become French speakers. So we started programming and we started activities. And I told Jean very clearly on, I couldn't wait for the day that we would pay that mortgage off and we would take control of the building entirely, and we'd force the ACA to relocate somewhere else. I said that with a gleam in my eye because although I meant it, I knew it would happen only over time. And so, the Franco-American Centre over the years has had its challenges. It's had its opportunities too, but I think it's a very important part of our cultural fabric in Manchester and in the state of New Hampshire and frankly, the region. We have a great opportunity now to harness the energy from people of French-speaking backgrounds and to try to focus that energy and to keep it alive. I was very clear too, as the founding president, that I did not want a museum. I didn't want to just simply house wonderful works of art and artifacts. I wanted this to be a living institution, one that offered programming, education, all sorts of activities centered around the French-speaking world. And I think because my successors were so good that we achieved some of that. In order to mark the 30th anniversary of the Franco-American Centre's founding, I went online and purchased a lifetime membership. And I certainly would ask you to consider doing the same if you haven't purchase a lifetime membership. It's a great way to mark the occasion of our 30th anniversary, a great way to help to endow the organization with resources to keep its mission going, and to give its a moral support, if you will. So if you haven't purchased the lifetime membership, please consider doing that. Please consider spreading the word to others who you know to become members and to participate in the work of the Franco-American Center. This COVID situation, by the way, it's COVID, I'm Ovid, not COVID, just for the record. But this COVID situation is going to be in the rearview mirror before we know it. And then we'll have a chance again to meet and celebrate, to live the French history. À la prochaine, mes amis. J'espère qu'on va vous voir really soon. I want to make sure that we're really together quite soon. So thank you, and thank you for accommodating me. I'm away this week, and so I couldn't participate in the live presentation, but I hope this presentation gives you a little history about the founding of the Franco-American Center. À la prochaine.